narratives, and who are the producers of digital media narratives, the complexity and the number of producers now in the media, in the digital media narratives, and in the end, how to influence the producers of mainstream and digital media narratives. I think that the only way is mapping digital literacy and insist in training digital literacy skills. So the first thing is what is understanding disaster communication and the role of the communication and information in disaster communication. I think that the elements, the aspects like media monitoring, message construction, and the audience engagement now is very more complex and more important than 10, 20 years ago, because now we don't know who produces the information and how they manage the influence. For instance, my definition of understanding disaster communication is made by definition and artificial intelligence. So I continue how we can understand in disaster communication. Key aspects we have to plan, to be in attention, timely and accurate information, and I ask who, what is accurate information, and so multiple communication channels. Who are the principal channels? Clear and consistent message. What type of message we must do, and risk communication, what that we can link with challenge in disaster communication, like information overload, rumors, right? Language barriers, because between young people and the eldest, technology limitation, the eldest don't like or don't know to use some technologies, and so on. Another question I think that we must think about, and all the exposition that we have here, are the concept of media narratives. What we understand who is media narratives. Now, for instance, Isadora brings us oral narratives, also Chiara brings oral traditional narratives about animals and things, and habitats. So narratives are something that present on media events that have effects and consequences, and can be fictional or not fictional. Fictional narratives are today very important, and the most part of the audience want and needs and give more attention to fiction narratives than information only, what we say information. We can find narratives in all media, like journalism, film, advertising. Sometimes advertising is more important to pass an idea than journalism, for instance, and content production. We have in media narratives, we must have selective frames today. The bit, what we can say, the bit frames is not a good idea. We call the bit information. It's only a frame, a minimal frame to pass the right information. So for this we need to choose the language, verbal, oral, and filming. And sometimes we saw this in communication politics today. The short message is the more effective, and is the one that called the attention for all the people. So choose the language and emphasis in the details. For instance, emotions is very important to give and to create emotion to the audience. Give to the audience hypothesis of the perception, not one perception, but several hypotheses for perception, adapt to the social class, for instance. And this is important because if I have one message with only one way to understand, it's only one target, and we need more targets in one message. So most part of the message should be directed to a lot of people and not for one people or a group of people. In the presentations that we have in this yesterday and today, all these elements are in the presentation when the researchers speak about or tell about media narratives. There are the plot, the characters. Mr. Adriano, I think one is the character of one the presentation, setting the time and place where the story unfolds, the theme, the conflict, if there are or not conflict or purpose in the narrative. So these are the elements that structure the media narrative, and all the media narratives have these elements. But now, beginning the problem that we are confronting in this moment of challenge between the technologies, the digital and the group of technologies that can do a lot of narratives and with different purpose. So in the mainstream media we have media groups, and we know what are the media groups. We know that media groups have stockholders, shareholders, the owners, we forgot the owners, but there are the owners, available technologies and resources, editorial guidelines, now more or less editorial guidelines, journalists, the professionals are journalists, journalists have practice, routines, values, and I can ask if today we can speak about journalist values, because they are very different now, because we have concurrence, we have media as industry and media as a product of influence, political influence. So these are all the ethos that make professional journalists are changing, unfortunately, I said. And I have also other professionals, that cameramen and photographs and so on. And also we have other producers in mainstream media narratives, content producers like people that produce films, entertainment, advertising, and these people have formats, themes, and heard trends, and so the audience are also the producers because they make trends also. And I have these professionals are indeterminate because we don't know how they manage the contents, and the choice they make are indeterminate. So this problem of produce mainstream media narratives now is more and more complex. And with the new technologies and digital media, the problem is more accurate, if I can say this. So in the digital media narratives, we have always stockholder, I can say stockholder, but also agent or actor, that is the big text that we don't control, never. We have hardware and software, hardwares and software with algorithmic programmation. We have also data capture, storage, processing, reprogramming, and transmission. We don't know how this manage and how this the reality and the goal that is behind all these things. And also we have the developers that we don't know how they choose algorithmic and other functions in the message, in the construction of the message. We have also devices, and sometimes we think that devices are the message, but not yet. Now, McLuhan is a very new author. They say that medium is the message, but I think that now is not true. There are other things that are the message, and the new technologies became, and the programmation became the start point of the media narrative, in my point of view. So we have material devices and immaterial devices. Material devices, you know, television, radio, cell phones, etc., consoles, and others. Immaterial, we have platforms, social networks, apps, games. I think games are very important for literacies, and so I can develop this in other time. But we have also professionals, and we can give names to some professionals, stockholders, shareholders. All the people knows the role of Musk in the platforms and in the big techs, etc. But some apps we don't know how they manage the apps. So we have programmers, developers, apps managers, users, individual or collective, users programs, users content programs are different things. We have also influencers, funds that make influencers actions, and also users producers. And the audience that constrain all the professionals, and they are a circle between professionals and audience, so this is the big picture of the producers. So how to influence the producers of mainstream in digital media narratives? How to influence? I think that is a very hard thing to do, but we theoretically we must awareness rising through target activities and products. Stockholders, shareholders, developers, managers, journalists, and journalists are always here, influencers and users, producers. So it's a theoretical frame, but how to influence these to produce, these professionals to produce something like more friendly with environment, animals, fires, how to do so. The first thing I think that we are in the moment that I can say in English, we are in a capitalist moment of change, neoliberalism and digital capitalism and so on. So we must say to these professionals that to have good practice is a good thing, and we must show that good practice have good results in the society, even economic and scientific results. So it's the first thing I think. And the other thing I think that is necessary to train people, and train people beginning for the children and young people. And so I am a very adapt the idea that literacy is something that we must have as a point in the young people, to the young people and the children, to show how to manage the new technologies and how the purpose that is behind some technologies. Well, and so with the training is something very important, and also something information, visual information, because now, like someone yesterday say, visual is more important than words. The words. So we have little message in image is very important to show that other themes, these themes are important and interesting for the society, and is able to do by learning and training literacies, digital literacies, and also I claim for this long time is we must know how to program algorithmic. We all us in social science, we must know program algorithmic and learn algorithmic programmation. So is my suggestion, and I think if we don't know these basic tools, we cannot influence in things like fires, media narratives, and digital narratives on fires, animals, and change the point of view of mainstream society if we don't know, and only a few producers spread the message for all of us. Okay, thank you.
I have a provocative question, since we have such an important person from communication science here in this panel. And my question, and thank you so much for this class.
Sorry.
No, thank you so much. Not only in Portugal, but also in other countries or regions, summer wildfires are now expected every year. Yet media coverage rarely focuses on animals affected by these disasters. Why do you think animals, pets, farm or wild, are so often left out of risk communication? It is a failure of journalism or a symptom of a deeper cultural blind spots. And you talk about language that we use, that journalists has to take into account. At the end, you also talked about children and how important it is for us to educate them. What is your thought regarding why the Portuguese media international as well is still ages behind of putting like animal life in the narrative when we have wildfires?
Well, thank you for the question.
Provocative one, because we have a journalist.
I think that we have a world anthropocentric.
Exactly.
So it's very difficult to change this point of view. And now, with the change of the world, we are in the moment, a crucial moment of change of values in the world, Occidental, Western world. So it's very difficult to put animals, because animals are economic beings, if I can say. And it's impossible the journalism not reflect these thoughts. And I think that when I have a more centered media narrative on animals, are because some emotional things happen behind the news. So some contact with journalists and media, with the people that suffer, and so the animals are also humanized in the narrative. So I don't know if it's the answer that we want, but is what I think. Okay.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I thought maybe the journalist wanted to say something because of that.
I have a provocative question for you as well.
Okay, another one.
Okay. But if you want, yeah.
I hope I'm not going into the question that you have for me, but I think the professor has put that very clearly. Journalists are not the only one putting messages and information out there, either accurate or inaccurate. I think that's not the point here. It's the proliferation of information producers, as you said. Journalism is facing a crisis. I think not. I'm sure. I think everyone knows that. We had social media. We let ourselves ride the wave, but we didn't actually perceive the danger that we're facing. We have artificial intelligence as well, and I think we don't know for sure how that will impact journalism, but I think it's safe to say that it is not a good thing, I think. I think that has to do as well with the critical thinking. I think the lack of critical thinking that we have today, that's why you said that short messages have a bigger impact, but sometimes reality cannot be reduced to short messages. We have political realities that reflect that precisely. Like people, it's hard to make people think about big questions. Not because they can't or anything, but we have so much information that I think people just shut down and prefer like simple messages, easy to digest, easy to accommodate in our own prejudices. Yeah, sorry, and values and our worldviews. And I think journalists have a big role in the messages that are out there regarding wildfires. We can get into that in a moment, but we are not the only ones, and journalism today is a business. It used to be a mission, I think. Some journalists still, I think some still envision themselves as defenders of democracy, of free speech, of free thinking. But I think the companies upon which media outlets, newspapers, websites, so on, rest, they are businesses. So at the end of the day, they want to make money. And I think there are a lot of conflicts and tensions between the public service and the business that create animosity in the media sphere.
I agree.
Yeah, and I don't want to be. I mean, I don't think we should point all our fingers at the journalists. I think also maybe sometimes. I mean, we're as researchers are also. I mean, we're too slow. If you're too fast, sometimes we're too slow, and sometimes we're bad at getting out the narratives and the complexities of our research in packages that are reasonably easy to digest for readers. But I think actually during the COVID pandemic, I think that it was an exception because a lot of researchers like dropped what they were doing and wrote something about the pandemic and used the material that they had around them to do that. And from my experience, also the journalists were very quickly to pick up on those things. I had a lot of colleagues doing great work, and also journalists calling them like, "Oh, can I do something about this?" But then I did something with colleagues on therapeutic helplines, like telephone lines for people lonely people during the pandemic, for example, and it was reported in the media. But then I continued like, "Oh, I should write about this and about that," and like I drafted some sketches, and then it was suddenly like 2024, and no one wanted to hear about the pandemic. And I don't think that's not to blame journalists. That's my problem, that I didn't get that out quickly enough, and then it's not relevant anymore. So I think it's a combination of like two worlds working in a very different temporalities, maybe.
Does anyone would like to join this question or to add something to Professor Isabel?
Yes? Okay, thanks. I had in the presentation, it drew my attention the question that I think it's crucial in journalism about specific issues like animals and conservation, which is of my interest, which is the editorial agenda or the editorial management. I would like to hear more about that, because the way that was described that journalism is in a crisis and is precarious, I think the editorial agenda and choice for sensational news rather than deep articles is crucial. And I was just hearing David just saying that it just wrote something, and in 2024 no one cares anymore about the pandemic, because to write an in-depth thing takes time. But I think it's exactly maybe what we need for these themes. If you don't have an in-depth article, it's not going to be informative. It's just going to be very kind of, how do you say, flashy. And does that interest the scientific project or proper data on animals and disasters? I doubt it. We have too much of the immediate communication. So how can we introduce a different timing for the news and I don't know, articulate that with the agenda of the editorials? I see here a kind of difficulty, big obstacle. And I had an experience about the workshops, and I think education, formation, I think it was said about journalists, that we actually offer the staying with the project for 2-3 days for the Links project, reintroduction, and we had trouble in finding available journalists because they're just too busy with other subjects. It's quite amazing. So even when a project offers good conditions for a journalist to deep their knowledge on a certain project or certain subject, they might not be available, or they're not free by their editor. Yes, thanks.
Well, my experience with 30 years is that journalists don't like to assist to a class. Journalists don't want classes. They want material, and material ready material. So we must give to them some material ready. In preference with 10 lines. 10 lines. Only this. And image, if you have some short image, so they publish, and maybe they come to you. So it's not to say nothing about journals, because I am a professor of journalism. So, but the profession is so hard now, so precarious, and they must have results and letters. So this is the only way to came to journalists. Sorry,
Professor Isabel said something, and now the ball is to you, because she said something about animals being the means. Remember, you just said something about it. Taking into account your research, Professor Redmond, when disaster strikes, do we mourn companion animals as family or as property lost? What do our reactions reveal about the power we claim over them and the boundaries we draw between us and them?
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting question. And I should use the microphone. During yesterday and today, we saw a lot of examples, during the lectures, of different ways of expressing loss of animals and also of natural habitats. And I think this is such a rich project if you want to look at how the status of animals is expressed through the way we're losing them or expressing our loss of them. So we had first people tend to grieve animals sort of in the mass or as a mass noun, or just grieving the loss of a whole species maybe, or the presence of a species in a certain area. So we had Charente expressing the disappearance of the peccaries, and farmers here in Portugal expressing a sort of grief for the loss of the greenery around them that they grew up with. So the area looked completely different when I grew up, and now I don't recognize it anymore. That's a sort of grief, I think, expression of grief. And that, but then there's, of course, there's the whole spectrum. So we have that sort of general grief, and then we have the sort of more ambivalent kinds of grief, with farmers grieving their animals both as individuals with their own peculiarities, animals who were maybe supposed to be slaughtered at some point, but they died too soon. But of course they also grieve, or they express frustration over their economic loss. So that's sort of an in-between grief maybe. And then we have also the examples of people losing their companion animals, which we also saw in material that you gathered. And there we can talk about a grief for individuals or family-like members. And I think, well, I'm inspired by Judith Butler, who's written about grief, and she's also interested in grief during disasters, although she's focusing on human beings. So she's written about grieving during the AIDS crisis, that it was a taboo, grieving victims of AIDS in the 80s and early 90s. And she's also written about grief in relation to the Israeli-Palestine war. During different periods, for example, during different periods in the US, it's been prohibited to put in obituaries for people dying in Palestine because it's regarded as politically sensitive. So I think that, on the one hand, we can use our framework and similar theories about grief to study how animals are grieved. And I don't think they're just grieved as family members, as I'm saying. They're grieved in many different ways. And Judith Butler also argues that grief can be subversive, so expressing grief in ways that are unexpected, or expressing grief for beings that are not usually grieved, that can also change the frameworks of grief, that it makes it possible to maybe grieve like a cow as a family member, and thus also challenge the value that we usually give to cows. So I think as researchers, it's both interesting to study the way we grieve animals, but also the possibilities of expressing grief in ways that might also change the way we approach animals and nature and our natural habitats around us. So I think that's the two sides of this project in relation to grief for animals that I think are important.
So you didn't talk about cats, but we'll have to discuss about cats. Does any of you want to add something? Professor Verónica? I thought you had a question.
The comment, if there's no other pressing question, I wanted to acknowledge, and maybe now I'll start by saying that what David just shared is really important also as one of the prompts that I feel it's easier to connect with journalists and media practitioners when we're trying to convey our messages, because it's a highly emotionally charged story. I don't know, Philip, if you agree, these questions of grieving, loss in different ways. So what David just shared is really something that I feel it's a way of easily communicating with the media and the journalists whenever we have something to share. However, I sometimes feel a bit in doubt whether I should do it, because I'm always afraid that then it slips too much into the emotional tone. And so I also want to keep it balanced. So here I'm sharing one of my concerns as a researcher. How can I still make use of the properties I know the media will use, which are the emotions, without going too much into a kind of discourse that will hinder the scientific message that I want to convey? So I would start by this comment. But my former comment was about Professor Isabel sharing, and I just wanted, it's just a comment to say, to acknowledge, I'm not sure how much you are aware, Professor Isabel, that you've just offered us, all researchers in the room, a framework to work with the journalists in our research projects. Because I know that some of us here are planning new research, submitting new research proposals to different lines of funding. And something that we need to include in our research proposals is a dissemination plan, is a plan on how communicating science, doing science communication is a key factor for scientists nowadays. And I don't think that social scientists are that used to reflect on the things that communication scholars reflect upon and that you've just shared with us, which is all the stakeholders, all the stuff behind a media message. And namely, in your last slides, you really provided us with a framework that all of us can use in order to work with the media. And then I also want to acknowledge this table, that this is working with the journalists. And sometimes I also feel that there's this gap, scientists on the one side thinking that journalists will just be sensationalists, and journalists on the other side feeling that academics are just too theoretical and have nothing that of interest to the audiences. And what we're trying to do here is to bridge this gap and build a multi-species community.
Does anyone want to talk about cats with Professor David? No, I was joking. You can.
Yes, no, not about cats, but I do have
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much. I wasn't actually expected. I didn't account for the emotional triggers in the round table in this discussion opened by you, in me, because I think I thought it would be quite straightforward. And however, there are so many concealed important aspects in the presentation you did, and now after hearing all your comments and questions, I wanted to share that I think that the thing that we haven't touched upon, and I wonder if we have still time, so let me see if I can put it in simple words. But there are two things that, besides the crisis of journalism that we're experiencing, and I put myself as an audience on the side of, as a reader in that relation with journalism, especially environmental journalism, or journalism that is critical and encourages this deep thinking. I think this deep thinking cannot be encouraged in newer generations, in younger generations. Me being a father, I know how difficult it is, because things move fast with technology, with basically the barons of techno-capitalism that are controlling all this and making social media quasi the mainstream media for the flow of information, which our children and younger generations are just prompt to just to scroll around and not really. It's impossible to have a deep thinking encouragement in this kind of world that we're living. So I think the literacy, which Isabel also mentioned, at home, outside the schools, it's quite important. It's been left out completely of the discussion. If we want to, in the ABIDE project, work in involving all the stakeholders, we do need to involve. I know this is something new, that's what I mentioned when I didn't thought about this being triggering me, but also these younger generations. Because at the end, what we will be communicating, most of the stakeholders that have power today are older, and will be older perhaps in 4 years when we finish the project. And the children that are 13, 12 years old will be coming into the age in which they are already wanting to be environmental activists or reclaim the streets and being more just to the care taking of animals and the environment. But if they are not prepared already at home, not at schools, it's impossible to engage with them. It's impossible, regardless of whatever happens in social media, whatever. And there's of course, there's the aspect of if you want to really keep reading or involve yourself in with this critical journalism, which is still it's still there, but it's inaccessible because of the economic constraints that we're facing. Makes them inaccessible, not open access anymore. We need to pay and subscribe and keep paying these accounts and opening accounts, which make them already elite information. So take the popular case of National Geographic, for instance. You do need, in order to get to that, you do need to subscribe, to pay. So most of the people we want to reach, basically, are not ourselves. We are in the elite. We're scholars. We are used to this. But we do want to engage with indigenous people. They will not be able to read this kind of information. We do want to engage with the rural people, with the pastor, with the shepherds. So for me, it's critical that the audience is involved in this, let's say, to break this change of pyramidal.
Well, I don't know if I can explain, but there are some movements, civil movements, in all the Western world that I know, that are trying to construct parallel networks of reliable information. So it's a goal, a very difficult goal, but I think that is the future. It's something that we subscribe, it's true, but you subscribe what you can do. If it's not a one subscription, it's what each other can pay. Yes. So I think that this is a big movement, and they begin in the Anglo-Saxonic countries. But I think all of us must to choose this hypothesis, you know. And there are also some platforms and apps that can give you another information, and with journalists also. So, well, for the journalist, it's not very, it's not a thing very good, because it's precarious also. But there are ethical purposes and also other sources of information, and I think it's very important to sustain these projects, I think. Another thing that I have to share with you is the succeeded use of games in some subjects. Well, we can do subjects about environment, about fires, about animals, the right thing to think about this. And these games are very important for children, young people, but also for the eldest, you know. Yes. Because sometimes we can done a game and also a film and also an advertising, and also, well, you can do a line of products with this theme, you know. And I think it's a well-succeeded proposal, you know, and not very expensive. It's something that we can do. you know. Well, it's all.
More questions to... Okay, can we now talk with a journalist in the room? So, Philippe, as a journalist, have you ever seen animals truly centered in wildfire coverage in Portugal, beyond the occasional image of a rescued dog? What stops us from telling their stories with the same urgency as human ones? It is editorial choices, audience expectation, or something deeper?
Sorry, thank you so much. Beginning with the last question, I think it's a mix of all of them. But before, I would just like to make a distinction, because I think we touched that topic in several comments, which is the difference between the everyday new species and the deeper ranging stories that go beyond the I don't know, the subject of the day. I see journalists as, because journalism is journalists, and I see them ourselves as such. We are storytellers as well. We're not just mere reporters of facts and events isolated in time and space. But I think with fewer and fewer journalists, newsrooms are getting smaller, and the expectations and demands are getting bigger. So we have to do more with much less, and in much less time, with much less resources. So for us to go into the field, for instance, and to make an in-depth story about a wolf, about a lynx, about I just remembered these ones because my teacher was talking about them before. But if we want to do an in-depth story about a family of, I don't know, of geese, whatever you want to choose, we need time to be in the field, to live in that environment, however briefly. And for that we have to, if we have like one colleague or two at home managing the website or the newspaper by themselves, it is not feasible in the long term. So when we talked about the social media, internet, we have the immediacy of the journalism, and we have more or less and less the journalists as the storytellers, as the investigators. We have good works being done, but I think it's not the rule anymore. Journalists were the eyes of the people in the world. I think nowadays sometimes the people are the eyes of the journalists in the world, because they post things in social media and people get the information before the journalist has. And I think that's a bit the counter, the inverse cycle of what should be. The Professor Isabel talked about the Western societies and the way that we see animals. I think journalism, even though a few decades ago social sciences and the humanities made the animal turn, I think journalists forgot to do that. And they reflect the naturalistic ontology, which is humans and everything else are separate things. And when we talk about wildfires, the animals are the domestic animals, and domestic animals are human property in the coverage. Because we have to distinguish between the live coverage, which is intense, it's dramatic, it's around the clock, and we have journalists like 24/7 in the same place, reporting on the movements of the firefighters, of the advancement of the fire itself. And then you have the aftermath. And I think the post-fire narratives create a space of opportunities to actually go deep, to go into the locations, and to not just see the houses that were lost, the sources of income, the livelihood, and even human lives lost, but also to assess the devastation the changes that were actually, because that's a story. That's not just a topic for researchers. It's a storytelling moment. We can actually narrate what is happening, what has happened, and how things are changing. But I think, you know, that talking about animals in journalism, I think animals in journalism sometimes appear. For instance, in the aftermath of wildfires, for instance, some NGO or a state agency, they release numbers of the area burned, the species that were affected, and the number of animals, the cadavers that they encountered, so on. But that's it. And there's so much more stories to tell. You talked about the image of the occasional image of a rescued dog. I remember, I think it was in 2017, the photograph of a young man in shirtless. I think he was with a lamb on his shoulders. Yeah, I think so. And that was, I think, a markedly image of what happened. Then that man was interviewed. He had a big media coverage, and I remember thinking, what happened to the sheep? Was it a small sheep? Was it with his family? I thought, okay, what about the other one, right? And I think when we talk about animals, sometimes animals are relegated to the dimension of the cuteness. When we see animals in new species, we sometimes is like, did you know that? Like curiosities or something that it's funny, or in the weekends, like just to get some more clicks, I think. Sure.
Even the sheep is a cute animal, right?
It is, yeah. But even so, we didn't know what happened, right? And I think when we talk about the lives of non-human animals, I think sometimes in the context of wildfire, it might seem to some people as disrespectful. Like, are we actually saying that the lives of animals and the losses of animals, the chaos that animals feel during wildfires are comparable to the human ones? And I think that stems from the anthropocentric worldview that we have, and it reflects in journalism as well. But even so, we have a growing attention from media into the environmental issues. If it is done properly or not, I'll get into that in a bit. But we have more and more news outlets and journalists going into the climate change, the fashionable trends. But I think there's a lack of specialization. I'm not talking about specialization, academics specialization, but you can specialize in a certain issue by practicing it for a long time. I think the narratives regarding wildfires and wildlife and the environment are dominated by the big ones. We have the television and the television, the news segments. They are generalists. They have to cover a lot of topics, and they have journalists that specialize in certain areas. But for instance, the coverage of wildfires, they have to do with the journalists that they have closer to the event. So it's not the specialist that knows that is happening because this and that. I think that's more like a post-event analysis. But I think journalists going into the environmental issues, they should be trained in I'm not saying that they have to take a course on anthropology or multispecies ethnography or so on, but they have to at least have a notion of how we can treat other animals, non-human animals, as agents, as lively agents. So they are not just like something that happens in the background. We share territories with them, we share our lives with them, and our deaths as well. So I think journalists have to be willing to do that ontological jump as well. And that I think that we were talking about how can we reach journalists with certain messages. I think that has to do with time, with resources, with people, with the editors that set the agenda. And I think it also has to do with the person themselves. If they think that animals are something that does not belong in the news, they will not get in the news. But if, for instance, you can reach directly to one journalist, and if that journalist is open and he has a different mindset, maybe he can pursue that story. For instance, I remember the lynx. We had a big success in our conservation and reintroduction project here in Portugal. And there's so many stories about those animals that we could have told, like where they came from, their life on the outside. Well, something more, because we telling a story of one specific animal, we can maybe not represent all of them because they are not reducible to one dimension, but it's a way of getting the story out there in a more attractable way than just say, okay, this species is endangered, there's a certain number of them here and there, the threats are these and that, and that's it. I think there's more ways of engaging the public regarding animals.
Thank you for
Yeah.
bringing a feline.
A feline, yeah, a cat.
We still have time for some questions if you want to comment.
So I'd like to make a comment. Now it works. And a question or two to Philippe. So my comment is about that photo that you mentioned. We were discussing that photo the other day in the team because we thought of including it in one of the slides. And there are two visual elements in that photo. It's a pity that we don't have it here. So can you describe again the photo, Philippe? Because you described it much better than I did. I
think it was night, I think, or was dark because of the smoke. I think we could see the orange of the flames in the background. You had people running from one side to another, and at the center of the image, you had a man with he was shirtless, he was visibly sweating, and he had a lamp, I think,
exactly.
a little shape around his neck.
Yeah, that's the one. So the two visual elements that are very striking to my analysis or whatever, the fact that it's a man, and remember that he's he's naked from in his chest. And so it's quite handsome, right? So there's a visual element. He's very handsome. He's very fit, and this is not indifferent to the audience. If you're an heterosexual female or if you're a gay man, so this is not indifferent. And the second element I would highlight is that he carries the lamp, and this is a very powerful image as in our Christian iconography. It's the image of Jesus Christ, thought to be the good shepherd of the sheep being the believers, right? So even if we're not Catholics, even if we're not Christians at all, or if we don't self-identify as such, the thing is that this is so much ingrained in our culture that our brain will identify the message, and I think this is interesting because it goes back to a characteristic of these media messages with which we can play, researchers, when we're trying to disseminate our messages, which is intertextuality. What is intertextuality? Is this capacity of the message travel from one message to the other, from one medium to the other. And so we rebuild the meaning using a message from another story, so to speak. And I think this is something we can play with as researchers or as disseminators of science, with the help of communicators such as Philippe. So this just a comment on that photo, because it's very powerful for several reasons, and the visual power, from at least in my opinion, is very big. So two questions to Philippe. I am very curious to hear about your experience as a journalist, and about if you ever feel the pressure of different stakeholders when you need to do a piece about a particular event, and if you have any stories to share about that. We are aware that journalists are under a lot of pressure from above, like they need to produce the best stories to sell. And here I would disagree maybe a little bit in that point in which you said that journalists used to be a business. I think, at least from what I learned, like it was a business since Gutenberg, almost, like since there's press, they had to sell the newspapers. But I understand your point that it had a strong role in democracy and establishment and of our current political systems. So my question being whether if you feel the pressure from above and at the same time from below, like the local populations putting pressure because they feel that journalists are the ones that will convey the message they need to convey, because politicians don't care. That's something that we hear when we go there. Politicians, it seems that people feel they're better heard by the media than by the political actors. So if that represents a pressure to you, what are the pressures that you feel that when you are in the field doing the kind of work you do? And my second question is, what would be the best, and I know this is not to answer, it's just to brainstorm together, what would be the best storytelling notes that we could pick on if we want to tell good stories about recovery and not so much about the emergency? Because we know that emergency in itself is very storytelling, because it's exceptional, so it ticks almost all the boxes of at least the oldest journalism values. But for recovery, it's long-term, it's not quick. Sometimes it's boring, it's not that dramatic. So sometimes it doesn't... I know that there's a box it ticks, which is the box of recovery itself. I think in our culture, there's this passionate thing around recovery, how we can recover. We see that, for instance, with stories from victims from violence or of wars and so on. So I think that broad box is there. But I wonder if there are notes that we could pick on when we are telling the stories that are long-term and maybe that draw on boring, so to speak, processes.
Thank you so much. Regarding the first question about the pressure from above, well, I think the pressure from above it happens more intensely in bigger media outlets. We are a small media outlet, very specialized in environment and sustainability. So we have more freedom than most to actually pursue different interests and different stories. Sorry. So we don't actually have, thankfully, a lot of the pressures that colleagues in larger corporations they face. They have stakeholders and the shareholders, and the newspaper is like at the bottom, and they suffer from all the pressures from above. From the pressures from below, I think being a specialized media, we deal with environment, and I include sustainability because we have the company side, so what they're doing, and we have science, and then we have environment in the sense that it's how humans relate to environment. We have animal stories, non-human animal stories. We have science journalism. So I think the pressure is, I speak for myself, it comes from within, because we sometimes deal with very specific information, and we know that, I think the media scholars will be more suitable to enlighten regarding that aspect, because the message about the urgency of climate change, for instance. People say journalists are alarming people, and that the negative message does not stick. So we have to find positive ways. I find it hard to put a positive spin on the crisis of the planet. So people don't like negative things. Yeah, I would love to write about nice things, but if the planet is in crisis, we have to actually mirror the reality. So that's a tricky terrain. That's why sometimes pieces like, did you know that this animal did this, is much more attractive to people than last year was the hottest on record so far. So the pressure, I think, is I feel sometimes more pressure from you, from the scholars, to be more accurate with, because it's difficult sometimes to try to explain something that it's complex in a simple way to everyone, but maintaining the scientific rigor. Sometimes it's really hard to like sum up in a sentence what you do in like 50 chapters. But well, we have to do. That's why I think it's a collaboration sometimes with the scientific community. About your second question, well, the news cycle is very fast. So if we are going to make like a periodic coverage of a recovery, for instance, I think it's possible. I think it is hard to be like a continuous process. It must be like, okay, this year is like this, like a checkup, I think. But it is possible to do that. But sometimes the editorial team sometimes, or even the public may seem, okay, I've seen this before. Why are you repeating the same thing you said last year or a few editions ago? So I think it's a matter of judgment more than anything else.
So, any more questions? It could be related to dogs. I don't mind. No? So, firstly, I would like to thank everyone here and everyone at home. I don't know if we have any, but thank you so much. And I would like to thank our panel for their generosity in offering us a framework to bring food for thought how wildfires transform and make us mourn not only just our cows, but also the environment. And here we should take into account the aftermath and the devastation. We triggered some emotional things, I'm sorry, and how we should target a more plural audiences by games for children that include wildfires, for example. Journalists are storytellers, and I really, really love this quote. I'm going to steal it, which is no. It is this one. Newsroom is getting smaller and expectations is getting bigger. And people are the eyes of the journalists. So, but I think Philippe told us something as scholars, just to make us, or just to pay for the pressure that we did to him in the beginning as he was a journalist. Like we as scholars pressure them. They receive more pressure from the scholars. So I think it's good to pressure, especially taking into account this topic. And thank you so much. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you.